My name is Trent Larson. I am a member and one of the organizing board members of the Thomas Tolman Family Organization. It's been around for 100 years here in Bountiful and helps track family histories. So my talk is on a motorcycle crash, discovering a long road to forgiveness. This is about my grandmother and her family, and an incident that happened and that I discovered in their family history. My grandmother had one older brother who was very kind to her, and she would ride with him sometimes. And here she writes, he had this sidecar thing on the motorcycle, and he'd sometimes come home at noon for lunch. And I'd be down on a corner, and he'd pick me up and let me ride on that motorcycle down to the middle of the block where we lived. In the title, unfortunately, you know what's coming. He had some friends that he went out with to go to Niagara, and they were on their way home, and apparently when they went around a corner, he must have hit a stone just right, and it threw him over the handlebars, and he hit, well, we call it a boulevard sign, and he was killed almost instantly. The family was all at home when they got the phone call. My father went down to answer it, and I heard it, and I can remember him coming back up the stairs on his hands and knees crying, and my mother was standing at the top of the stairs. Of course, she went completely to pieces because he was her favorite. It was especially sad because of her mother's reaction for the rest of her life. She said she was not a happy woman after that, ever. She never really recovered from losing him. She has other memories of that time frame. That very day, she opened the window and was hanging out talking to him because something was going on the next day, and I had 20 cents, I think, and I needed 25. So I conned him out of a nickel, and he gave it to me. And when they brought his casket home later, I put the nickel in his hand because I owed it to him, and I didn't want to have him go to heaven without that nickel. You know, it's a sad thing when you have a death in the family. Now, many, many years later, she was taking care of her mother on her deathbed and keeping her sedated because she was in a lot of pain. And then one day she was in the hospital bed and she just opened her eyes. She looked at me. I was doing something for her and she stared at me, right fixed. She didn't move her eyes or anything, just stared at me. And I said, "Mother, what do you want? You want something, don't you?" And she guessed that she wanted her father, her mother's husband. And she said, "Okay, he'll be home at 5 o'clock. So her eyes were open when he got home. And then she just sort of slipped into unconsciousness. But she had a hold of his hand, and she hung on to his hand until she died. In fact, I remember the whole scenario. You know, it really wasn't very easy, but it always made me feel good because, that was a cleansing, forgiveness, everything. I read that and I didn't quite understand what it meant, but you often hit these things when you're reading your family histories. They have some background that you don't know about. Later, her father died. It was a lot quieter. He just sort of slipped away, as men often do, slip out the back door. I enjoy reading these histories, and I enjoy going over them and sometimes categorizing the stories and indexing things for later so when other people want to read them or search for interesting things and look at the timelines, then they can correlate with other people on their history. So that's when I discovered this book. Her mother blamed herself because my father did not want him to buy the motorcycle. He said he couldn't have one. My mother signed a paper so that he could get cash value, that whatever the cash value on that insurance policy was, and he used that for the down payment of the motorcycle. That's heart-wrenching to know that your mother has me as a spouse, if I had done something that caused that, and what is my guilt? And of course, her husband, after denying him that. And she went around behind his back and did it anyway, and then he ended up getting killed. How sad is that? So, how did this affect him? I mean, later it says, and he held a little bit of a grudge because he held it against her, I think. He tried not to, but he did a little bit. It does have a happy ending, because like we read before, it always made me feel good, because I mean, that was a cleansing, forgiveness, when she held his hand all the way till he died and he paid attention to her. But imagine that, how sad, for 18 years of their life they had that between them. So that was the first lesson I got from this, of course, is forgive. No matter how hard the thing is, if you have love between you, that's the first priority. Forgive before it becomes too late. But the other lesson that I got from this was the discovery. There are all kinds of touching stories in your history, and not just one reading. Sometimes going over them again, you really discover these touching moments. So that's my story. Thank you.